Okay, in my previous video on path analysis using AMOS, I illustrated how to run a basic path model um, where the situation is that there was no missing data or no missing values on the variables in the data set. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can deal with missing data with AMOS and kind of illustrate that you have to sort of adopt some different strategies or somewhat different strategies in order to run your analyses. So the thing about it is that let's start off by looking at a data set that has missing values. So this is the previous data set. I've got missing values kind of laid out in here. So all the cells where there's nothing included, those are basically reflecting missing data points. So so I want to show you first what happens. This is the basic model that this is the final respecified model that we ran in the previous video. I'm just going to start there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call up the data files, and I'm going to call up this data file that has missing values in it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to click on OK. Now, let's say I want to run this particular model. What I have to do, because there's missing data, there are actually two options to speak of, or two general options. One is to utilize what's called full information maximum likelihood estimation. So in other words, it's an estimation approach that factors in the missing values on your variables. The second strategy is to perform some type of data imputation on the original data set. So in other words, impute missing values and then import that into the program, and then as a complete data set, and then run the analysis on that new completed data set. So I'm going to kind of illustrate both of those strategies, and the first strategy is running full information maximum likelihood estimation. So to do this, what I have to do is I have to click on estimate means and intercepts. If I don't click on estimate means and intercepts and try to run the model, essentially what will happen is that I will get an error message that says click on estimate means and intercepts. So so I'll click on that, and in terms of my output options, there actually are a little bit more restricted given that I'm clicking on this particular option. So in terms of bootstrapping, I can't do that. So if I wanted to try to perform a bootstrap, let's say where I have generating like 1,000 samples and confidence interval and so forth, what will happen is that when and also let's just go ahead and look at another one. If I click on modification indices and have that clicked, you'll see that there will be errors that will pop up. So if I click on this, you'll say I can't perform a bootstrap if there's missing data in the data set. So so I have to so I have to essentially click out of that and make sure that that's not clicked. If I do it again, you can see that the modification indices also have an error message. So I can't have the modification indices specified as output. So everything else so far is pretty good, but those two things I can't have if I have clicked on estimate means and intercepts. So in this case right here, now I can run the basic model, and I can get a lot of the same information that I got previously in the video where I was running the data analysis using a complete data set. So I can click on this little toggle right here, and this takes me back to the regression coefficients and the covariances. So the unstandardized estimates again are essentially unstandardized path coefficients, or basically they're partial regression coefficients. These are essentially covariances. And if I click on standardized, then basically I end up with what amounts to beta coefficients depicting the relationships between each variable and the endogenous variables, and these would be correlations. Now you can see that some of the values kind of overlap with some of the lines and stuff. So if you want to actually make this a little nicer looking, if you go over here and click on Move Parameter Values, when you highlight a path or whatever, then you can actually move things around, so it kind of cleans things up a bit, and it makes it a little nicer to look at. It makes it a little bit more publication quality. So I'm going to click out of that, and you can see that if we go under the output file, you can see now when you look at the estimates, you get all the same stuff that you had before. So you have the unstandardized regression weights and their significance levels. You've got the standardized regression weights, which again are essentially beta weights. You have your covariances and correlations. You have your total effects, unstandardized and standardized, the same for direct effects and indirect effects. What you don't have is the because we couldn't request bootstrapped standard errors and confidence intervals. Essentially, we have no mechanism for testing the significance of these effects right here. So at this point, everything is purely descriptive. So that's really kind of one of the downsides when you're running full information maximum likelihood through AMOS, is that you don't have the ability to bootstrap those standard errors, and because of that, you can't test these effects for statistical significance. All you can do is essentially describe what's going on. Our model fit statistics, you interpret these the same way that we sort of talked about in the previous video. So that's in a nutshell a lot of the basic options related to your output. So at any rate, let's go and look at another option. So another strategy for dealing with missing data is to perform some type of imputation. So in other words, try to come up with a reasonable guess as to what a value might have been had it actually been there. So to perform imputation, essentially what you have to do, I have my basic model drawn out here, but essentially what I have to do is I can go to under analysis properties, I have to keep estimate means and intercepts clicked. Okay, if I don't click it, I'll get an error message in a minute. I'm going to keep that clicked, and if I go up to Analyze, go to Data Imputation, then you'll see that you've got several options. You've got regression imputation, stochastic, and Bayesian regression imputation. And so what's going to happen is that right here it says number of completed data sets, and so right here you can ask for one or you can ask for more data sets, and basically what you can do is you can run your analysis on each of the data sets that you generate, and essentially determine how well things sort of hold up across those data sets. So you can ask for the data sets in multiple output files or a single output file. So right now I'm just going to focus on just having a single output file using stochastic regression imputation. So at any rate, when I click on, at this point, if I click on Impute and then OK, the data file has now been computed or created. So if I go to File and Data Files and File Name, you'll see I've got the same name as previous, but now I've got a little extension here of _C. So if I click on that and click on Open and then click on View Data, now I have a data set that has no missing values on my variables. So it's a complete data set. So now if I want to run an analysis using bootstrapping and asking for modification indices and so forth, I could certainly do that. Basically at this point, let's see here, go under here. So I'll click on OK, and I can, at this point, if I keep this clicked, that will create problems. So I'm going to unclick it and ask for bootstrapping. I can ask for the modification indices and so forth, and click on OK, and then run the estimates. And now when I look at my output file, you can see that I now have again my estimates. Under matrices, I've got everything as before, but now I have, when I click on the actual estimates or the effects, now I've got the options. So there's my indirect effects. Now I have my bootstrap results. So I've got the bootstrap standard errors, confidence intervals with the bias corrected method, and then down here I even have the significance level for those indirect effects. So all this works. I basically have all these options when it comes to all these different effects. Also, I do want to note too that under regression weights, when it bootstrapped, it also creates. So this is basically using sort of normal theory tests. But if you happen to have situations where there might be some non-normality in your data or whatever, those types of things are violating homogeneity of error variances and so forth, then you might utilize the bootstrapped options as well in order to test the significance for those effects. So you can see down here, like under regression weights, I've got essentially the bias corrected percentile method, and essentially I've got the confidence intervals where I have the lower and upper limits of those intervals for each of these estimates right here, as well as the significance levels. So that's kind of one of the nice things with bootstrapping that you don't have when you have missing data. So at any rate, what I've done now, so that's just creating a single data set. If I wanted to create multiple data sets and run the analysis and just kind of check, make sure that that the results are stable, let's say I ask for 3 data sets. So if I click on impute, or actually before I do that, what I want to do is go back to my original data file that had just the missing data with it. So there it is right here. And then click on open, and then click on OK. So I'll click on under estimation, estimate means and intercepts. Again, I don't need all these other things clicked because I'll end up with error messages and so forth. So if I go up under analyze data imputation, I could ask for 3 data sets. So if I click on impute, in this case right here, okay, so I think I just had a little bit of a goof there. I had the original data file open, so click on impute. So now it's imputing with the 3 data sets. So I'm going to click out of there and just kind of get a visual. You can see under data files, view data. I'm just going to click out of there. Or actually, under data file name, I want to go to missing values and click on OK or open and try this again. So now I've got my imputation variable, and this is just basically reflecting all all the values that that were included in the data set that had imputations. So we have those imputations here. We have the second data set here with its respective imputations, and there's 2 there, and then a third data set with its imputations. So essentially what I could do is actually run each of these data analyses, run the same model in each group. So you can see the total N looks like it's 420, which is actually incorrect because we had originally 140 cases per for the original data file. So if I want to run the model using, let's say, the first data set, then I would click on grouping variable, click on imputation variable here, and then click on OK. And now this little group value highlights. And so what I'll do is I'll click on 1 and then OK. And so now you can see n is 140 out of 420. So now when I run the analysis, now I can go back to analysis properties and click off of estimate means and intercepts, because now I've got essentially a complete data set. I can ask for the bootstrapping and modification indices and so forth. And when I run the analysis, now you can see that I have, again, my estimates and everything, as well as the opportunity to look at bootstrapped effects, which we've been talking about. So if I want to run it in the second group, then I can just click on group value, move it to 2, and click on OK and run that. And you can see that once again we end up with all the same good stuff that we had previously. So at any rate, those are some options when it comes to imputing using SPSS. Those are, the options that are provided are really not strongly recommended options when it comes to imputing data. So there's actually a better strategy, which is basically called multiple imputation. And so I'm going to briefly show you how you can use multiple imputation using the literal program, the preprocessor prelist. SPSS does have a multiple imputation add-in that you can purchase. I don't have that on my computer, so I'm just going to perform the multiple imputation using literal, and also you can get a student version of literal that should be able to do the same thing. So at any rate, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to literal, and essentially I'm going to call up my my original data. So I'm going to go to import data, and drop down, go under SPSS data file, and I'm just going to stick with path analysis with missing values because we're going to actually impute data. So these are just some previous runs with it. So I'm just going to just to walk through, I'm just going to call this. I'm going to create a prelist system file that I'm just going to call missing values, for lack of a better way of referring to it. So I'm going to click on save, and now what's called a prelist system file opens up, and essentially you can see that where it's got asterisks, these are just the negative 99999. These are default missing value values for the variables. So when you don't widen the column far enough, then it looks like it's there's nothing there, but in fact there is. So at any rate, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to data, because I need to actually define what the variables are and how to treat the missing values and so forth. So I'm going to highlight all of my variables. These were all assumed to be continuous. So I'm going to, under variable types, I'm going to click on continuous and OK. And under missing values, I'm just going to go ahead and note that it was negative 9, basically 6 nines. So at any rate, I'm going to click on OK and then OK here. When you do that, you need to be sure that you save the new file, because it needs to save the new specifications for these variables. The next thing is I want to actually perform the multiple imputation. So the way I do this, I go to statistics, I can go to multiple imputation, and basically I'm just going to go ahead and highlight my variables, select them over to the select variables option box, and then click on output options. And you'll see that where it says data, I want to create a new data file that is essentially capturing basically SPSS data. So I'm going to click on save the transformed data to a file, and I'm just going to call this imputed1.sav. So basically literal is going to create a data file, basically an SPSS data file, which is the extension for the data file in SPSS is .save or .sav. So now I'm going to click on OK, and you have actually options for number of iterations and so forth. So it defaults at 200. I'm just going to stick with that. And now I'm going to click on Run. So you can see when you're looking at the output, you can kind of get an idea about what's going on. So you can see what's been imputed. Or rather, it's not really giving us any information here on that. But at any rate, you'll see that you know, when you kind of scroll down a little bit, it's giving you some details on the different variables and so forth. The summary statistics. The total sample size is 140. It's giving you the variable names, mean, standard deviations, and so forth. Skewness and kurtosis statistics. And so it's a lot of descriptive information. So now at this point, I now have a new data set with values that are imputed here, 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 here. You know, really, you know, wherever you see these where it says missing data in pre-list. So I'm going to go to my SPSS data file, and I'm just going to actually create a new variable under our new file, data file. And so now at this point I'm going to click on Open Data. And so this is the data file that was created previously when we ran it through pre-list. So now I'm going to click on Open. And for some odd reason, it's not importing exactly the way I would prefer it. But nevertheless, you can see that you've got your data file. You've got case 1 all the way through 140 that you see right here. And so these are our different variables. So I'm going to click on Next. You'll want to click on Fixed Width. And it asks, are variable names included at the top of your file? And in pre-list, actually they were, but for some odd reason it's not working out here. So just keep it as no, because if you click on yes, it's going to start with importing from case 2 as opposed to case 1, in which case we'll end up with a sample size of 139. So I'm going to leave it as no, so I get the full 140 and fixed width. Then click on Next. And then you'll see we still have our columns listed. Next, and then next again, and then obviously, and then at this point you can assign variable names. So I think kind of looking back at our data set, the original data set, we had let's see what it was. We had well. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and written down the name. So under variable name, so the first variable, which is highlighted for this column right here, it was performance goals. So I'm just going to call it PRF goal. And then after that, you can see that the name appears. I'll do it for the second one. The second one was achieve. So I'll just achieve. For the third one, it is mastery. The fourth one was interest. And the fifth one was anxiety. Okay, so now I have all those. So now, you know, I just click on Next. This is just further walking through, and then Finish. And now I have my data set that has the imputed values for those that were missing on our variables. The data set has our variable names listed as well. And so at this point, I can just save this as a new data set. I'll just call it imputed for path model, for lack of a better way of putting it. And at this point, then I can just import this data into AMOS. So there it is. Then I can just click on OK. And I have the benefit now. I don't have to click on this. I can just do all of my bootstrapping and everything. And so when I run the analysis, you know, there you go. that's basically it. So really, probably the better imputation strategy is to utilize multiple imputation, and I wouldn't generally recommend using the imputation options out of AMOS. If you have the SPSS multiple imputation add-in, that would certainly be one way to go. But like I said, because I didn't have that option, I don't have that add-in for my computer, I just ran it through pre-lists, which just kind of note that essentially you can get a free download of list roll, basically a student version, for like I said, for free. So essentially, with that free version, you could actually do some of this imputation without having to necessarily buy the SPSS add-in. So it's just a little thought. At any rate, I hope you find this video helpful, and that's it.